Good morning. Today we are concluding not only Masechta Hades but the entire Nezikin. Rabbi Yehuda says, if you want to be Hasid, you learn the entire Nezikin. We are up to that Gimel of Beis. The last thing we looked about was things that make you forget. I guess we forgot what we learned yesterday. It's interesting, and there's so many other things that the Gemara doesn't mention here that if you look at Shulchan Aruch, that's brought down in different places, that makes you forget, including the 5 vegetables that the mon you couldn't taste the month, like cucumbers and onions and garlics and leek and so on, are things that make you forget, and also the way you dress and all of those things. We're up to the Gemara here, Amud Beis, the Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Other things that make it difficult for you to learn. Says the Gemara, we're about 25 lines on the top of the page, where it says Asara Dvarim, right in the middle of the line. First of the line was Simonach. Asara Dvarim Kosher Lima, the 10 things that make the learning difficult. Ha'oiva Tachas Ha'afsar Gam, if you walk under the reins of a camel, I'm sure the camel itself, V'choshken Tachas Gam Alatzmai, it makes it, for whatever reason, difficult to learn.
This is all Mashali.
I don't know. You explain why a camel, I don't know. Well, either Ben Shnei Gemal, you walk between 2 camels, Dafka camel. Well, either Ben Shtei Noshi, you walk between 2 women. But Isha Vedes B'Shnei Noshi, if a woman walks between 2 men and you're one of the men. Well, either Metachas Reich Ra Shal Nevel, if you walk underneath the terrible stench of a carcass. And why use the expression underneath it? Because the stench always rises, so therefore whenever there's a bad stench, it's always above you. If you walk under a bridge, water didn't go underneath it for 40 days. These all sound like ruchenzige things. I don't know what the explanation is. You ate bread that wasn't fully baked. If you ate meat that has in it the residual of the leftover junk from a ladle. So you're drinking from water creek that goes to the quarters, and you shouldn't have any enough from things in basic quarters. And if you look into the face of a mess, interesting that by going lahavdol, the dafka have a custom to have the mace. Everyone walks by and they have one last look. If you read the ksav on a monument, what it means is, as I saw once in one of the Derush Forum, that it means is the only way you remember a person is by reading their matzever, then you're not going to remember the person at all. A person is only if it's inside your heart, and you don't need to read the ksav al akeva to know who the person was. Rabbi Meal writes that Amol, if you want to know how many Eden are in a city, Rabbi Meal was the chief rabbi of Antwerp, Tel Aviv. We just take Lalach, Daki Moshe, big Talmud Chacham. So anyway, so he says, Amol, you want to know who's a Yid? You walk into a shul, and you already know the entire Jewish population, because everybody went to shul. He said, then after a while later, okay, shul maybe you won't find everybody, but you go to the butcher shop, and you'll see, you stay there a whole day, you'll see the entire Jewish population, everybody kept kosher. So after a while, that didn't work either. He says, today, you go to the Beis HaKodesh, and that's where you find the Jewish population. So, that's what he's saying over here. It's a blight if that's the only way you know. Yeah. Tell them what we learned. I'll tell you a positive word that he said, so you say positive. We'll have in Teisus Menachos, but we'll wait till Teisus Menachos. Hold the thought. That's not so far away. It's Vachim de Menachos. Tell them what we learned. When the Nasi enters, everyone stands up, and you don't sit till the Nasi says, sit down. He's a step lower. The entire rows that sees him, they start standing until he sits down. So number one, only those 2 rows. You don't wait till he tells you to sit down. As soon as he sits down, you can sit down. And that, but the rest of the people sit. One guy stands up, while the other guy who was standing before sits down. Until he sits down. What about the children from these Talmidei Chachamim? B'shas that they are also contributing, then mafsiin al roshei. They have a right, if they come late to a function, everybody's already sitting on the floor. Remember, everybody sat on the floor. When they're walking, it looks like they're walking on top of everybody's heads. They can do that. It's not a chutzpah. He was there, he had to go to the bathroom. He's allowed to come back. even though it looks like he's standing above it, it's not covered at tzibur, but in this case you're allowed to. B'nei Talmidei Chachamim shememunim aviyem parnas al tzibur, the children of Talmidei Chachamim, that their parents are parnas on the tzibur, the leaders in the tzibur, is you can hear me, yes?
Yeah. No, I was going to ask the difference between a chacham and a talmud chacham in the previous bit.
Yeah, good question. Before it says b'nei chachamim b'talmid, a chacham, a talmud chacham, we have a concept in the Gemara called the tzurba merabanan and the chacham, and there's differences in halacha. So whenever you bunch together a chacham and a talmud chacham, the talmud chacham is the tzurba merabanan and the chacham is the chachamim. However, I don't have any basis for what I just said.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Lowest level of the 3 dayanim.
Yeah, we're saying it. There's Av Bezin and the other ones are called Chachamim. No, he's saying it. It says it Chachamim v'Talmidei Chachamim. So, or you take it literally. The Talmud Chacham are the students of that Chacham. Take it literally, or the Tzurma Rabbanan. Because sometimes you'll find the Gemara says Ahu Tzurma Rabbanan. Sometimes it says Talmud Chacham. The parents are parnesim al tzibur, they're in charge of the community. They have enough understanding to listen to their father. This first one, they said the first row. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. The Art Scroll he's saying here says the difference is whether they had smicha or not. Okay. The Achoreim Klapeyam. And the Achoreim Klapeyam, they're sat with the backs to the people. Is not a problem because they just entitled to cover it as well because they're the child, the scion of these Talmud Chacham, and they understand what the father's saying. If they don't have understand, they sit there before their father, playing Klapeyam, but their faces is to the people, which sounds a little bit the chutzpah because their backs are to their father. So therefore, the other gis is, which everyone says it should be, is they sit behind their father, and they're facing the same direction of the father, which is facing the people. Even when it comes to not to learning, they always give them cover. They give them, they're considered a branch. They give them covered. Oh, Mama, you said a minute ago, Yotza, let's say that if he went to the bathroom, he can go back to his seat, even though he's walking above everybody's heads. Only if he has to urinate. But if he has to properly go to the bathroom, he's not allowed to come back. Why? It's his fault. Because that you could control yourself. You should have gone before he went. In fact, a person should always go to the bathroom if you have to go properly. First thing in the morning and late at night. Because when you went to the bathroom to do proper bathroom, you have to go out of the city. So therefore, go before people are around to see you. You don't have to go far away and it'll be embarrassing if nobody sees. However, today, Rava says, today that the world became weaker, it's a bit hard to understand that. Our Papa said that our Rava, his teacher, says today. So what was our Papa talking about? Our Papa lived, was younger than Rava. He was a student. Even for Gdolim, even if he went to the bathroom in the morning, it's possible he had to go again. So therefore, he's allowed to return to his seat. Only while the father's still alive, we give them covered even outside of learning, and only if the father happens to be there. This mission of hierarchy, sorry? That means they give him covered as well. You said even on sniff the branch.
Yeah.
If the branch. No, just like the father is given covered, he's always ahead of the table and all that. So his son, or whatever, his children, his descendants, sit next to him. Kozman, the father is alive and happens to be there as well, if it's a Beis HaMishnah. This mission of hierarchy was said in the times of Rashbag, and now the Gemara tells a fascinating story. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel was a Nasi; he was the Nasi. Rav Meir was the Chacham, and Rav Nosson was the Av Bezin. Now, who this Rav Nosson was, the Orach Sefer Orach says that his father was the Reish Galusa in Bavel. We have Rav Nosson Babli, don't know if it's the same person, but Rav Nosson was his father Reish Galusa Bavel, and he came to Yisrael. So he was the Av Bezin, and Rav Meir was the Chacham. So Rashbag was there, everybody stood up for him. And Rameir Nosson came in later, they were never going together. The way people conduct themselves was they gave the same covered to Rameir Nosson what they gave to Rashbag. There has to be some kind of a hecker between I'm the Nasi and they're just the Abbezin and the Chacham. Now, even though we learned in Gemara said that Rashbag was a big Anov, but he was talking about the office, not about himself. Talking Hamasnita, that's when he made this rule. For the Nasi, you do this. For the Chacham, for the Abbezin, you do this. For the Chacham, you do that. That day when he made that takana, they weren't in the base of measure, didn't hear it. The following day, they came together. Obviously, they were good friends. They saw it. Like, come, nobody stood up for him like he used to be. For Amnas only the first row, and the rest didn't. For a mayor or a mayor, they came together. I saw one guy stood up, one guy sat down. I mean, what's going on here? This is what the Rashbag said. We have to make a distinction. Meir was very offended. I'm not Chacham, but Ibid. I'm the Chacham like Hegmar Erevin did. They were such a Chacham that nobody could understand a word that he said. And you are the Abbezin. Niskin Milsa, let's do something. Till he done my Navidle. Let's do something what he did, similar to what he did to us. What can we do to him? Namely, Gali Uktzim. Let's go tomorrow when we see him. Let's tell us Apulpul in Masechta Uktzim. The Leslie, he has no clue what's going on in Masechta Uktzim. The Kivin the Lagama, and then everyone will prove it to everybody that we're so much more learned than he is. Namely, we will quote him the pasuk, Mi Yamal Gevurah Hashem. You know, has the right to repeat the Gevurah Hashem. Yashmi Kasai. Mi Yamal, who's the one who has the right? Yashmi Kotilaza. Only someone who knows Gevurah Hashem and knows the Torah and Ganzen. Yashmi Kotilaza can say all these things. No, let me know. This is exactly a scheme. Let me know. Only somebody who knows the entire shot. Nah, but they will impeach him. It seems that impeach all these Gamliel. They have no. I'll be the Abbezin and the Atnosi. So he always said, I'm inferior to you, but you'll be elevated one step because Abbezin is only one step below Nasi, and I'll go up one step. I'll become the Abbezin. Shaminu Rabbi Yaakov ben Karshi. Rabbi Yaakov ben Karshi didn't want to see Machlekes develop. He fought the Nasi, it'll totally embarrass him, humiliate him. He sat there behind by the window of Rashbag, he sat there by the window, and Pashat, he opened up, Goras V'tana. Suddenly, he started to learn Masechta Uktzin loud. Abshimol was not a fool. He said, what's going on here? Why Mitamol is sitting outside by my house and he's learning Masechta Uktzin Heichav and Ko? Maybe something's going on and he's trying to memorama, he's trying to allude to something. Yov Daita Vigorsa. He sat there and he learned the whole Gemara what this Talmud was telling him. And Lamacha the following day, Rameir went ahead with his scheme. Now remember, Rameir was the one who was the architect of the scheme. Rav Nosson was just a participant. Amrulay said to him, Nesimar, V'nisim Uktzim. So Rameir said to him, no. Actually, it says they both said to him, Rameir and Rav Nosson, Amrulay, come and tell us Uktzim. Pasach V'amar. He said it beautifully. And after he said the whole thing and he finished, if I wouldn't have learned it yesterday, you would have embarrassed me in public. He tossed him out from the base of Medrash. So, but the fact of the matter is, they're the big Talmidei Chachamim, far greater than Shimon Gamliel. So both of them used to write down questions on a piece of paper, and they would throw it into the Zal. It'd be nice to find one of these papers. It'd be worth a fortune. Hasam, they threw into the Zal. The Havi Mifrik, those that they can answer, they answered. But the Havi Mifrik, they couldn't answer all the questions. They then said back to them, we don't know the answer. So they would write down the answer, throw it in. Finally, Rabbi Yasi turned around to Rav Shimon Gamliel. He said to Rav Shimon Gamliel, the real Torah is outside. We're inside. Either we all go out or you bring them in. Okay, we'll bring them in. Me or Nikasa, I'll counsel them. The name we will no longer say things in the name. Asikul Rameh will call Rameh Rachedim, and Rav Nosson will call Yesh Oimrim. Tracy already said a few places in Shas that not every time. Sometimes we have Rameh, and sometimes Rachedim. Sometimes we have both the same thing. So sometimes that Rameh wasn't the only one called Rachedim. The very fact that it was called in plural means that maybe others call Achedim and say Miyashayim. Or sometimes the mayor said it before this story. He's called a mayor. After the story is called Achedim. The Mashal asked why he's a Lashon Rab Machedim, not Acher. So the Chayda.
That title already taken.
Exactly. That's why he didn't want to call him Elisha ben Abu because his Rebbe, Elisha ben Abu Acher, I think. But the Mashal says he called him Achedim. Very interesting because they called him Acher. That became his name. and then call Oimer Dover Shem Oimer, maybe Gul Oilam, that Rameh would have the chus that he would bring Mashiach. He didn't even want him to have that chus. He says, somebody out there, who knows who it was? It could be anybody. So they wouldn't even, when they say it, they're not giving him any credit so that he would not. I mean, they were fighters. This house of David were terrible fighters. They saw in a dream. They saw in a dream, go be Matthias, a piece of Shimon Gamliel. Rab Nosson went. Rameir lo yazul. According to some of the Farshim, Rameir did not see the dream because the Balachalemus knew. Remember, Rashi says in Baruch the Balachalemus. The Balachalemus knew that Rameir won't follow the dream, so he didn't show him the dream, so he shouldn't be nichshel in not going to be Matthias. But not from Matthias, Rameir wasn't. That the Cholim Lemailim Medidin, some truth, some not truth, and there's a whole Tashbats in the Chuvas, because the Gemara Sanhedrin, there's a story there about your money, your father died, you left by the tree, but it's Maisa money, so the Gemara says, keep the money, even though you found the money, you don't have to follow Maisa, Kadibla Chalemis. Anyhow, do we say only by Dinim Mammon, because they heard Mammon Acharoiv? Very interesting discussion. When we say we don't follow the Cholim, we do follow the Cholim. Somebody came out to me this morning and told me that he had a dream last night. He had a dream last night that he was standing, he couldn't hear, but the Rebbe was sitting on one side of the table, and I was on the other side of the table, and we were the Rebbe was talking to me very intensely, and I looked very being makabel, whatever the Rebbe was telling me. And I asked him, tell me one word. He couldn't hear. Wow. Anyway, so this is yeah. The Azal Rab Nosson Amalei Rab Nosson went. Rab Nosson went, and he Matthias to Rashim Lil. Amalei Rashim Lil need a hanila camera the Wuchataka helps you who your father was. Lemevi Abez Shavinach. Okay, but you have a right to be Abezin. Abez Shavin. I mean, Nasi, you want to become a Nasi. So anyhow, Gemil Makabel his thing here. But he was not Makabel Rameir. And the difference is as follows. Rab Nosson's father, as we'll see in a minute. Oh, let's continue more further. Master Rebbe Rashim Rebbe said to Rashim his son, Achedim Einim. He told him a didn't name Rameir, he called him Achedim. That Elo Haya Tumur Lo Haya Karev. So it's a whole thing. We'll learn that if you took by Meiser, the ninth animal you called by mistake 10, the 10th you called ninth, and the 11th you called 10th. All three become Kodesh, and each one has a different din. And the question is whether the 11th one is merely a tumura, an exchange of the 10th one. And he said it can't be pshat because because you can't do a tumura with tumura. Anyway, it's not an important discussion. We'll learn in tumura. But the point is he called him achedim. So son said to him, who is it? Shimon said to him that you such a gewaldige word and you're not telling me who it was. Achedim. Somebody wants to completely uproot, you're covered. They're gone. He passed away, that mayor. Why are you still calling him Achedim? Even if you want to call him your enemy. The enemy is maybe gone. His stacking, his belligerence is here forever. Amalei said back to him, that only works where they achieved something. But the point at the end, nothing happened. They just had a machshavara, and we had more kedusha machshavara, nothing actually happened. They said Elo haya tumura lo haya karev. They said in a maid, Elo haya tumura lo haya karev. He said Amru Mishum Rameir. Amar Rav Afil Rebbe Davnusahu, even though Rebbe is a big honor of Tana Amru Mishum Rameir. He couldn't bring himself to say Rameir said out there someone said the name of Rameir. Amar Rameir Amar Rameir Amar Rameir lo Amar. He couldn't say Amar Rameir. Even though Rebbe was Rameir. And Rebbe said everything I kabbaled from Rameir, more Aaron did of Gimel, and he said if I would have sat for Rameir, I would be even smarter. Yet he couldn't bring himself. Rebbe was a fighter for his family. Because they said by this, the Rebbe says, okay, the Welt says by Chanukah that why is there's no Mishnah of Chanukah except that Mishnah Baba Kama, which is a side issue, because Rebbe was upset. Chashmonaim, the Kohanim took away Malchus Beis David, and the Rebbe is Malchus Beis David. That's what Chacham Shaifer writes that, and the Rebbe says it's impossible to learn Pshat. Yet here you see. And forget, here's a raya. Rebbe didn't hide the Dvar Torah for Rameir. Rebbe was angry. He clearly angry with Rameir for what he tried to do, to embarrass his father and take away the whole Nesias. And yet, he still learned the Torah. Just he didn't give the credit to Rameir initially. So to say that the Rebbe didn't want to bring Mishnayos to learn Chanukah because he was upset, impossible. Chas v'shalom. I mean, see right here, because he was even more upset. This is mamish negayah to his own father. They were gonna take away the nesius. That's what they were trying to do. So clearly, and the Rebbe has another pshat altogether. Why there's no mishnah? The Rebbe's pshat and the kitzur is that you're not allowed to write Torah Shvapeh, only Eish Lasses LaHashem. But because Hanukkah was still very, fresh in everybody's minds, and everybody knew the story, you had no right, Eish Lasses Hashem, to write it down. That's why it's not in Mishnah. Times Gemara, things were different. Anyway, based on Mashal doesn't actually say this, but based on Mashal, the pshat is a beautiful pshat here that Rab Nosson came from a father who was a Reish Galusa. So he came from a place that he had rights. Rab Meir, we learned in Margittin, was from Nira and Keser. Rab Meir Zayd was a guy who tried to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Then he became a ger. Remember, he threw the arrows in all different directions, and it all landed in Yerushalayim. He said, the Eibishter wants to destroy you. They can't run away from the Eibishter. He ran away. He was a Megaya, and the Gemara there says, who was his great-great-grandson? Rab Meir. So Rab Meir came, so Rebbe said, I can be Moichel Rab Nosson. I can't be Moichel Rab Meir. It's in the genes. His Elta Zay to try to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Comes along, Rab Meir tries to destroy the Beis David, the Nesias. There's something going on over here. That's more or less. And that's why he says Charabas Lenetzach. There's a story, there's a history here. It's not just a one-off thing. Anyway, we're right in Amar said Rab one of them says that Sinai is better somebody who knows Kol Torah Kula, Mishnayos and Braises. Somebody's shop is far better. So Gemara says Rabbi Yosef was Sinai, and the Rabbi was Oikar. Rabbi Yosef had an unbelievable memory, and even though he was blind, he remembered everything else. And we had, in Baba Kamas of Yom Beis came a Targum, and Rabbi Yosef says that because he always said Targum, and he knew everything. And the Rabbi was an Oikar Harim. Rabbi was sharp like anything. Sholchel Tamos, they asked, if we had to make a Rosh Hashiva, who should we choose? Ezim and Koidim, a guy who's a Baal Mefalfel, or a guy who knows his stuff, but he's not a big great pulpul. Sholchel, they answer back, Sinai Odiv. Choose Sinai. Hafla Pella. If you're supposed to choose Sinai, so they decided to choose Rabbi Yosef, we'll see in a minute what happened in the outcome. Yet the halacha is never like Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef, the halacha is always like Rabbi. Machlek is a shayne if only Masech Bava Basra, or in the entire Shas, and most places hold people in Rishonim hold it in the entire Shas, except 3 places. If Sinai Odiv, why is the halacha always like Rabbi? I have no idea why. It always bothered me.
In the Bnei Yehuda says that through being like a harem, you get a lot more halacha.
That's a pshat. But the Poilig Gemara says even so, Sinai is better. And the next part of you'll see the next part is not the same thing as this, which the Gemara says Teku. Here the Gemara gives a klorazach. Sinai Adif. End of story. And Allah never like him. Everyone needs the owner who collects all the bushels of wheat. Rabbi refused to accept it. Rabba was a king for 22 years. Then Rabbi Yosef became king. The Nasi, the Shiva. The Shiva is like a king. All the years, and Rabba was 18 years old when he became Rosh Hashiva. And he passed away at the age of 40 because he was from Beis Eli. Abaye, with Beis Eli, lived till 60. So Rabba was a Rosh Hashiva 22 years. And all those years, I feel he would not invite a doctor to his house. So Rashi brings, one shot is that the doctors always came to the Choshev people's houses. Rabbi Yosef didn't want to conduct himself like a Choshev person. So the doctor went to Rabba's house, and Rabbi Yosef would go to Rabba's house. But Rashi brings a Chassidish pshat. The second pshat in Rashi is beautiful. Rashi says that, I'll quote you Rashi, beautiful Rashi, on the left side, 2 lines on the top. The is the Garsi, that those who say he didn't want to conduct at all any kind of leadership because he should have been the Rosh Hashiva, but he declined. All those years that Rabba was Rosh Hashiva. Why? Climate. What do you mean? He had no time. He had no time to go to the doctors. He was such a masmid, and he dafka learned in Rabba's yeshiva. Not at home. He learned in front of Rabba, who really was a student. He could have been the Rosh Hashiva, but he learned in front of Rabba, and he had no time to go to the doctor. That's his pshat. The Ramez pshat is that, in the Taisa Rosh brings a few pshatim, and he brings the Ramez. The Ramez says the schus of him giving up is right to be the Rosh Yeshiva, the able to help that he and his entire family, because it wasn't only him, lebay safe, even for his family, were zeicha, they never got sick. But if you're looking more at brachas, there's one detail that's missing in this whole story, which changes the whole story around. And it's surprising. I don't know if you remember more brachas. The very ending of brachas, the Gemara tells the same story, but it adds one line. A stargazer came and told Rabbi Yosef that whenever you become Rosh Yeshiva, you're only going to live for 2 years. So he said, I'm no rush to pass away. I have it. And the chiddush was that he lived for 22 years plus another 2 years. It changes the whole story around. Here you have a Baisa, such an honor, such a da, such a yens. He didn't want because he wanted to live. The Ramban in Chumash has a whole other pshat. The Ramban in Chumash and B'chukais, a fascinating Ramban. You have to learn it. From the beginning of the Ramban. He writes over there, the Ramban was a doctor. And he writes, why it says Mikan nitna Torah shus l'rayv. But he says nowhere does it say that you have a shus to go to a doctor. There's a shus for a doctor to heal, but there's no shus for a person to go to a doctor. And he says, really, you shouldn't go to a doctor. But Haraya, Rabbi Yosef didn't never invite a doctor because you have to be beiteach and soimich in the Eibishter. And he was. And the fact that he didn't call a doctor, now I'm adding to it, is a raya that he didn't believe this Kaldoi. He didn't believe her because he had B'toch in the Eibishter. So why Taka didn't he take it? Because he was an Onov. And he allowed Rabbi to take over. But based on that Ramban, that is, no. I'm basing myself on the Ramban. Ramban talks from here as a raya that you don't go to doctor. But if you're not on the Madrega of Rabbi Yosef, you don't have that kind of B'tochen, okay, so you go to doctors. Sorry? Oh, he's very strong. That Ramban is powerful. You have to read it. Pelton Amuna, he says, if you go to doctors, read it. But he said, we're not in the Madrega, so, and he himself was a doctor. Imagine what he would do for a profession if nobody came to him. Sorry, what were you saying?
Maybe he didn't go to the doctor because he did believe the stargazer. He doesn't go die.
Yeah, but he could die as a sick person, or he could live as a healthy person. And no, but what about the members of his family?
Maybe because he was a doctor, he said best to get a doctor. He's thinking working cash was safe.
That could also be. But I once said the pshat here, and the Gemara in Baba Basra, we had Gemara Baba Basra there in Daf Samach Zayin. There's a whole it talks about if you steal something and the Balbos says Meyayish if Koinen not Koinen. Then we have a whole discussion if Shina is Koinen Machlei B'Sham Basil. If you steal something and you change the item, are you Koinen? You and you can keep the item, it's got to pay money, or you have to give the item back to the original state. So then they ask the question: if Shini Hashem Kishini Ma'isa Alav, what happens if it just changes the name from a piece of leather? It became now a tablecloth. He didn't do much to it other than changing the name. Before it was just a piece of leather, and now it became a tablecloth. Shini Hashem, is it Kishini Mais, and therefore the Ganav can keep it, you just got to pay the money back, or not? So Rabbi Yosef says over there, it took me 22 years to figure it out, and I finally figured out that Shini Hashem Kishini Mais. And there's no Rashi there. What took me 22 years, and what happened after 22 years? This is Pshat L'Chayla. He was not a Rosh Yeshiva for 22 years. Well, he was told he could be one, but he wasn't called one. But then, Shina Hashem. But when he finally became a Rosh Yeshiva, he suddenly felt, it's a different world. The Siyata, the Shmaya that he had, and everything else, and the cover that was given. Now we understand. Shini Hashem is Kishini Ma'asadami. After 22 years, when he finally became a Rosh Yeshiva. Anyway, maybe yet, maybe no. But let's continue. Anyway, Abai Barabba. Fascinating, one last fascinating Gemara. Abaye and Rav Zeda and Rabba Bar Masna. Have a yasa. They were sitting there. They have a tzricha reisha. They needed Rosh Yeshiva. Who should be? And nobody can agree. Now the Rosh says not that each one felt that they should deserve it. They all felt. Interesting what the Rosh says. They all felt that if they point one other person, the others will get offended. Why did you point him and not me? So therefore, nobody was able to appoint anybody. So they made a deal. Anyone who says a Mishnah, a Braisa, and nobody has any questions, and people ask questions, and is able to answer off all the questions, he deserves to be Rosh Yeshiva. Who was it? The Kula Yifrich. Everyone, Rav Master, they're all abgeschlagen. But the Abaye Yifrich, nobody was able to overcome Abaye. Azye Rabba Labai. In our version, it's Rabba, but other versions is Rava. In fact, it will go to Shulchan Aruch. I'll tell you in a second what he says there. He says it's Rava. The Gavaresha, Rabbi felt either in a negative way or in a positive way that he was higher than everybody else. Amalei Nachmeni Psach. Say now Divrei Torah ve'ema, because you have Rashi says you have Sayata Deshmaya. Why you call him Nachmeni? There's a Rashi here which you don't have anywhere else. So normally we say Nachmeni is either because Rabba's father's name was Nachmeni, and he was his nephew Abaya, and didn't want to call Abaya by the name of his father, so he called him Abaya, or Abaya is Asher Becha Yerucham Yosem. Look at Rashi's second shot here. The Ikadamri, the Beloshin Gnai correlate.
Get ahead of yourself.
Why? Nachmeni, Kloimer, Adayin Ato Talmido Sharav Nachman. Now, throughout Shas, you'll have constantly Rava talking to Rav Nachman. Very, very seldom do you have Abaye talking to Rav Nachman. In fact, it sounds like Abaye didn't really learn about Rav Nachman so much, if he learned at all. Abaye learned mainly about Abba Rav Yosef. Rava, you're looking at throughout Shas, it's always Rava talking to Rav Nachman, arguing Rav Nachman, asking Rav Nachman questions. You very seldom have Abaye. But the Poil says most versions don't quote this Rashi. But here's a negative way. The Vilnagon's Girsa is Rava, and he says there that nobody called Abaye Nachmeni. And because the Shulchan Aruch says you're not allowed to call if your father's name is like a Talmud or whatever, you shouldn't say it. It was Rava. The Vilna said that everybody called him Abaye. It was a term of endearment or whatever. Only Rava, who constantly fought with him, called him Nachmeni, entitled to call Nachmeni. Sorry? No. Abaye was a Kohen, and Rava, according to most Mefarshim, was not a Kohen. Rabba was a nephew. Rabba, his uncle. And because Rabba was a Kohen and Abaye was a Kohen. Rabba, sometimes it says Rabba was a Kohen, and Tosfos talks about it. Let's read Gemara. Iboilu, okay, so now you have Abaye with Rabba. So Abaye was the sharpest of them all, and here's the bigger pella. Allah is never like Abaye, except Yalchigan. How come? Now here's not a question of Sinai Yoker Harim. Abaye was everything. He was everything. He knew more braysos than Mishnah. He said they couldn't slug him up. So he was sharp. Why is halacha never like Abaye? It's like something else is going on in halacha.
The halacha almost never like him.
Okay, true. Okay. That's okay, maybe. Rab Zeda with Rabbi Master. Who's better between the two? Rab Zeda is Chari from Maksha and Rabbi Master Muslim Masik. It's not the same thing as before Sinai and Oiker Harim. My teku. It's very different. Otherwise, why here's the teku and there it is, and different words. Chari from Maksha is that he's very, very sharp. And he can answer everything else. But he also knew Mishnayos and Braisos for a lot. And the Rabbi Barav Master wasn't quick. He was slow, but he could gribble. He would go and he would work his way through, and he would take every word and not run through it quickly and have pulpul and everything else. As you know, there were two shittas in learning generally, whether the shittas are pulpul or those who learn shittas pshat. There was big fights throughout the years. People say Shalom Kodesh, he writes the difference. I'll do a quick tell. Shalom Kodesh writes that he went. It was Ostreich and the Rhine, two the yeshivas. One yeshiva was pulpul, and one yeshiva was mainly learning, not so much pulpul, but more on learning as much common than anything else. He decided to go to pulpul. But pulpul, as I am a pulpul, he says there, this is how they learned the Gemara. The Gemara would ask a kasha. They would close the Gemara and see if they can figure out the answer on their own. If they were able to figure out the answer on their own, and then they looked in the Gemara, like this. If the Gemara gave the same answer they gave, what do I need the Gemara for? If Ayishaya, he writes up on himself. If Ayishaya can figure it out, I need a Bible over. Tell me this. Obviously, I don't stop chatting Gemara's kasha. So I have to go it again. And finally, when it comes to a point that the answer that he gives, the Gemara does not give, so then the question is, what's wrong with my answer? And he works it out. Then he finally finishes that shtickle Gemara. He goes to look at Rashi. If Rashi learns the Gemara the way he learned, what do I need Rashi for? I figured out my own. That's all over again. And then the same thing with Tosfos. Anyway, he said he learned 3 blot a year. Oh, and when the Gemara says, Hanicha, or Bishleima, according to this time, everything makes sense. Yeah, of course it makes sense. Every word in the Gemara is so concise. Why precise? Why have to tell me Hanicha? And without the Hanicha, I couldn't know that it was Hanicha, or, if that's all good. Obviously, there's a big kasha here. And the Gemara said, but nevertheless, if you think about it, Hanicha or Bishleima, we can work it out. Shalom. So he sits and works out what the kasha is, what would the tatzah be. That's all it's so. He says he learned 3 blot a year. He did it for 3 years, I think, and he realized he'll never finish a Masech. Think about Shas. So he went the other way. And yeah, that's like there's Mosa and Maksha and there's Chad of things. But there's a takeum. Before it was clear, saying like a hardim. Interesting to know. It seems that halacha has nothing to do with this thing here because why halacha is never like Abaye? Abaye l'chayre was a coal boy. Each koilos had everything. Sinai, Oikar hardim, everything. Yet Abaye is the only one that we daven every day in davening. Abaye Baba Shol, which other Abaye Baba Shol? And I know, but it's his name. And Kiddush HaChedesh Abaye, the only Abaye we have it twice.
But the halacha is not actually like that, Mishnah.
It doesn't matter. We'll hear it. Yeah, I'm saying Ali Baba Shol. We'll see. We'll see later. But it's just interesting. Anyway, have a good day. Tomorrow we start Masechtas Zvachim. Hadin Allah.